Greetings from the people of planet Earth.
Welcome to a special Democracy Week edition of our Democracycast podcast. This is Dean Edwards. I'm coordinating editor for the International Collaborative Media Alliance and Democracy Watch News in Salem, Oregon. Today we have a special report by Mark Taylor-Canfield, an independent journalist in Seattle, Washington, and one of our contributing editors. Mark is going to be speaking to us about press freedom, gentrification in the Seattle area, net neutrality, and of course Big Bertha, the large machine currently stuck in a transit tunnel being built for the Seattle Transit District. So Mark, I'm turning it over to you. What have you got to report this week?
Oh, hey, I want to thank you for being so flexible with me today. I really appreciate that. By the way, I'm an independent journalist up here in Seattle. I've got a timeline on an article blog at Daily Kos about an event that's happening tonight, and also a breaking news story for you. So the breaking news story is something that's been a focus of my journalism for quite a while, and that is freedom of the press. Reporters Without Borders, which is an advocacy group for reporters, journalists, bloggers, netizens, is what they call them, people who share information on the web. This is an international group that started in France, but every year they do every year they have a annual World Press Freedom Index report. And so the story has been that, according to Reporters Without Borders, the United States has been dropping steadily every year in terms of press freedom in comparison with other countries around the world. And a precipitous drop began during the Occupy Wall Street movement, when a lot of reporters and live streamers and independent citizen journalists were harassed, rounded up, arrested, etc. And so the United States went from 19th on the list in terms of all of the countries in the world that they're reporting on, to last year fell down to 46th in the world, which means, by the way, that if you want more press freedom or you want to have an easier time doing your job as a journalist, it would be better to move to Costa Rica or Namibia, because they're higher on the list than the United States right now. Usually up at the top you've got Finland and Iceland, very small countries with a lot of freedom of press and a lot of protection by their government in terms of freedom of the press. Obviously Spain is experiencing a lot of problems right now because they're proposing a gag law, and journalists have been subjected to that. But the United States this year, the new World Press Freedom Index from Reporters Without Borders was just released this morning, a couple hours ago, and it lists the United States as now 49th in the world, which means that this country has dropped from number 46 to number 49. You can go to Reporters Without Borders, and I will add this to the support document, or somebody else can actually, but it's a very easy website to remember, although it's the initials are for the French name of the group, but it's RSF, rsf.org, and they're highlighting the new 2015 World Press Freedom Index on their website. So I've been tweeting this out everywhere, of course. It's a story that I've had a really hard time getting anyone to cover, even the alternative so-called independent media over the last year or two. So one of the questions I was tweeting about is, who's reporting on this? Because so far I haven't seen anything. And it's a problem I run into where I think even so-called alternative media is loath to report a story that they think may undermine their own credibility in the eyes of their audience. So I will struggle to continue getting the word out, and obviously we'll have to work with sympathetic people in alternative media in order to make that happen. So another reason that I need to get off this call soon is that I would talk last week in length about the displacement of artists and the lack of galleries and independent music venues and artist co-ops where people can work, live, and show their stuff in Seattle because of this mass development that's going on. And in my Daily Coast article, I'm pointing out three major elements that are leading to this situation. One, Seattle is the fastest developing city in the country. That's well documented. There are high-rises and multi-billion-dollar complexes going up across the street from me right now as we speak, and dozens of construction cranes across the city. That's why the joke is that the crane is now the new official city bird of Seattle. Number two, because of this, real estate prices and rents are skyrocketing. So people are experiencing a huge increase in their rent overnight and are being evicted because they can't pay the rent. Of course, this started with home foreclosures back in 2008, but now it's happening to people in apartments and houses that they've been renting. And then number three, there is no rent control in Seattle. Although there is a petition that is now being distributed that is calling upon the Seattle City Council to introduce rent control. So with these three elements, the result is the displacement of a lot of working families, middle-class folks, poor folks, and artists. Because as one of the artists who lives in a co-op up on Capitol Hill told me last night, artists just don't have much money. There's not much support for the arts in this country, especially if you're an independent artist. And it's just, most artists don't have two dimes to rub together. So they have no political clout. They have no economic clout. Part of my complaint is that most of the large arts organizations and commissions in this area cater to, the Seattle Opera, the Seattle Symphony, the Intiman Theater, all sorts of very well-known, heavily funded establishments that have dozens and dozens of million and billionaire donors supporting them. But small and independent arts organizations don't get any support. There was actually a mayor's arts task force on this issue a couple years ago that I got involved with. We basically had to force ourselves on because they were only going to talk to the big arts institutions in Seattle about funding the arts. But regardless, we forced our way on the mayor's arts task force and came up with a series of suggestions, proposals about how to change that situation. The mayor vetoed every single proposal we came up with. So this has been an issue for a long time for me. I was also actually arrested live on stage during my own performance at the Symphony Hall here at Benaroya Hall because I had said that I was going to stage a protest, but they didn't even allow me to stage the protest. As soon as I stepped on stage, I was arrested, which sort of backfired for them because it was also the story on all the news TV shows that night. Composer arrested. But anyway, it's an issue that I'm working on, and right now, in the last couple of weeks, a very amazing performance art music venue called the Josephine has been forced to close its doors by the owner of the property and from pressure from the city and complaints from neighbors after probably 10 years of amazing music and art on a totally sort of volunteer independent level. So they've closed their doors. And another place called the Summit Inn, which some refer to as the Slummit Inn, had a major block party once a year and all sorts of art shows and parties there. They are are all having to move out. This was a big artist co-op with their own gallery. They're all having to move out because the property has been sold and the new owner has jacked up the rent so high that no one can afford to pay them. And by the way, the person that owned that building and the person that owns a very famous rock club here in Seattle, and also the venue where there's a major art walk party and performance happening tonight, has been, this particular owner owns property all over the country, but especially in the Northwest, and he's actually been very, very supportive of artists and allowed artists to live and work in his spaces and been a big part of the local independent art scene here himself. So this one person has actually provided housing for a lot of people and spaces, studios, and places to work, do their art for a lot of people in this town. But some of the property, you know, he's being offered lots of money for some of this property. So although he's working with the artists to try to help them, there is no official city program to protect artist housing. So that's what's going on, and one of the reasons that I have to run quick is because there is a big event happening tonight that I'm actually performing at and speaking at another artist co-op, which is also on the market and reputedly worth millions of dollars. So they're all very worried that this could be, you know, one of their last shows, and so I've been trying to help them with this event and also getting the word out to the other journalists and city officials, the community, about this situation with artists losing their galleries and their performance spaces. And as I'm writing in Daily Coast, the city of Seattle is overhyped. That's my opinion, in terms of its music, art scene, innovative, creative, free-spirited kind of community. Because although it is, there is legal marijuana here, and I did hear somebody on the phone the other day answer somebody from the East Coast and say, ask them, you know, what Seattle was like, and they said, well, everybody here smokes marijuana. Well, that's not necessarily true, but it is legal, and it does have a history of bohemianism and you know, great music scene. Well, because of the developments that are going on, a lot of those clubs are closing their doors. The buildings are being sold and demolished and turned into condos and huge corporate headquarters. The neighborhood that I live in looks like a war zone. There's very little difference between the rubble that you see, entire blocks completely demolished by wrecking balls, as opposed to bombs during a wartime. It's a very similar experience. You walk down the street and suddenly the block that was there yesterday is gone, and so is the one next to it, and all it is a pile of concrete, bricks, and bent rebar. So that's what's happening in Seattle, and that is one of the issues that I've been tweeting and writing about. And then there were a couple other stories that I'll throw at you really quick here from Seattle. This has to do with breaking news stories that have come out in the last few days. There was an incident Eastern Washington that happened just the other day, and there was a shooting in Pasco, Washington. The police shooting killed someone who apparently threw a rock at them or something, and so the video has gone viral, and it's been a big issue in Washington State. Actually, there are a couple other news stories I'm trying to get to right now, but I'm having trouble with my computer. So if you don't mind, I'm going to sign off here, and if I can get back to those stories, I will let you know. Otherwise, that's my report for today. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Mark, do you have any updates for us on the marijuana laws and how that's being implemented there, or on the $15 movement in Seattle?
The $15 an hour minimum wage has now gone into effect. It wasn't scheduled to go into effect according to the referendum until 2015. So, and there is a phase-in for small businesses. So that could take up to 2 or 3 years for that to actually happen. As far as the marijuana laws, there are a lot of still issues that they're trying to work out. The taxes have been way too high, and so the state sort of priced itself out of the market. And also supplies have been low because of the heavy restrictions and regulations that the state has placed on the industry. So that's a continuing story, but it does look like the state legislature has finally come to their senses and realized that you can't charge a 20% tax on each level of the industry and expect it to survive or serve the public. One other quick story I do know about is that Governor Jay Inslee has been talking for a long time about finally, and this issue is what major protests and sit-ins at the governor's office was taking place as early as April of 2011 with a group called Occupy Washington, which was long before Occupy Wall Street, or at least months before Occupy Wall Street. But this issue has been going on for a long time, but Governor Jay Inslee has actually started to take on this issue of the tax loopholes for corporate people, for corporations, and the major tax exemptions. So specifically, even though less than a year ago, the governor had to call a special session just to address these tax exemptions for Boeing. In other words, trying to come up with enough to keep them, in the state. That now there's actually a backlash, and the state legislature is discussing ways of eliminating some of those tax exemptions. So that's one big story that I've been following. Yeah, I just forgot to mention the result of this situation at the Artist Co-op that's having a show tonight, and then also one on Valentine's Day, is, by the way, they're having a art science fair. So it's going to be interesting because they're trying to sort of exhibit what's happening in the community and what's happening to artists as a social science experiment. So there will be people dressed in lab coats and doing little experiments and things to try to highlight that point. But this group, which is called In Arts Northwest, and I put that on the support document, it's capital I-N, capital A-R-T-S, capital N, capital W. They have actually formed an LLC. They were a nonprofit, but now they formed an LLC. They filed in Olympia, the state capital, for that. And their goal at this point, believe it or not, and this is what they're up against, actually, is they want to start a capital funding campaign with their first goal being to raise $1 million. The reason for that is because the property is reputedly valued somewhere between $1 and $3 million. It's a huge house. It used to be a mansion that some wealthy family built around the turn of the century in Seattle. It was later actually turned into a halfway house. And then the building behind it, which I think was built in the 1920s, was an apartment building with several stories, and they just connected the two buildings to create this huge space which takes up pretty much half of a city block. There are 30 artists living there. They have their own gallery where they do shows all throughout the month, and also especially on Art Walk, which is the first Thursday of every month. And they also have a performance space with a full-on stage and lighting and PA system and everything in the basement. So it's an amazing place where artists live. They have studio spaces where they can do their work, so there's a live workspace. And they have a gallery that they can show their art, and also a theater where they can perform music or do theater projects or film screenings or whatever. So I just wanted to let people know, and they will be looking for help with this capital gains capital funding project. And obviously they'll have to raise more than $1 million because they'll have to pay taxes on that. But they want to do a Kickstarter campaign, a youth fund me sort of thing, and just start asking for help from charitable people around the country and in the community. So I'll keep you updated on what's happening with that. I just wanted to give you the upside of the story, which is that this particular group of people are not just walking away with hands empty, to go live under the bridge. They are they want to push back, and they want to make some kind of a statement and try to get support from the community. So tonight's event is partly to reach out to the community, bring them into the space, show them what's going on there and how valuable it is to the community, and then hopefully, people will be able to share their ideas and come up with ways that they can help. And there will be suggestions in terms of how people can help out the artists in that situation. But what everyone is hoping is that somehow they'll be able to hold on to the building and keep this tradition going, which this has been happening in this building for the last 6 years. So there have been a lot of events there. A lot of artists have moved in and out. It's had a big influence on the community and the artists tell me that it's had a great, it's been a great inspiration to them, because one of the issues here that we don't talk about is just how isolated and alienated and disenfranchised artists feel in the community. Many of them are completely apolitical, by the way. They don't vote. They don't pay attention to politics. They're busy doing their creative work. That's their life's mission. And so they often feel and dismissed by the community in general. And so when they can live together in a communal atmosphere where there's a community space where they can all hang out together and they can get their privacy in their own spaces when they need it, it's been really helpful in terms of them as artists developing their craft and learning and being inspired by other artists, and then sharing shows and having an opportunity to share their work with the public. So I just wanted to mention the positive side of that and what the next step in their story is.
The mayor, Mayor Ed Murray, just gave his State of the City address, and it was the main points of his address, as far as I was concerned, had to do with economic and racial inequities in Seattle. He started his speech by talking about inequities because this city is the fastest developing city in the country. It's also got the fastest rising rents of any major city in the United States right now. And he made it very clear that with all this prosperity for high-tech and biomed corporations, a lot of people are being left out of the picture. So there's been a lot of homelessness and displacement. We talked last week about the displacement of artist housing. But the mayor made it very clear that he is aware, and the city council is aware, that not everyone is benefiting from this big boom happening in Seattle. Some may call it a real estate bubble. He also talked about continuing to try to reform the Seattle Police Department, including continued training on de-escalation tactics and bias-free policing, because as we know, the Seattle Police Department was under a Department of Justice review for excessive use of force and racial profiling. So he's calling for more increased civilian oversight of police discipline and accountability, and increased transparency in incidents of officer misconduct. It is true that for the first time, the Department of Justice actually complimented the Seattle reform measures, because the training on these issues has actually finally become standard in the department. There was a lot of talk about how the training of officers just wasn't meeting what the Department of Justice would consider national standards. So for the first time, the Justice Department is saying, yes, they see progress. This has been a long battle. We have a new police chief, Kathleen O'Toole, who was the former police commissioner of Boston and also served on the National Police Reform Commission in Ireland. So I just thought it was very, very interesting that he started his address by talking about inequities, economic inequities, racial inequities, and that was a major theme of his address, that and also the reform of the police department. Although he admitted that we have a long ways to go. The other issue that I wanted to mention was net neutrality. And the reason I want to mention that is because freepress.net, which has done a lot of really good work on this issue in mobilizing people, sent a delegation to our state senator, or our U.S. Senator, Maria Cantwell's office. And I disclaimer, I was one of those people. And I just, wanted everyone to know that the congressional delegation from Washington State has been very supportive on the issue of net neutrality. And I will try to post on the support document a link to a video of Maria Cantwell on the floor of the U.S. Senate talking about her idea, which is something called the Freedom of the Internet Act, which unfortunately she has not received a lot of support from her colleagues on. One of the things that she mentioned in that video, and it's actually a very good, quick instructional video about the nature of net neutrality and what it's all about, because one of the thoughts here amongst organizers of the campaign to support net neutrality is that it just doesn't come across to a lot of folks as a very sexy, quote, sexy issue. It's kind of a technical issue that a lot of people don't understand, and the phrase net neutrality just doesn't mean a lot to people when they first hear it. And so there's going to be an ongoing effort to help educate the public, and hopefully nationally, so that people actually understand what's at stake here. But as we know, it is a direct challenge to media democracy, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press, which is where I come in, because I think it's very important that we continue to support net neutrality in terms of how it may affect independent and alternative media and journalists. But Maria Cantwell does support the reclassification of internet broadband service under Title II of the Communications Act, which is the goal of the Free Press campaign as well. So to treat it like a public utility. One of the drawbacks, of course, which she mentioned, was that these net neutrality initiatives do not cover cell phones. So that means, at this point at least, it hasn't extended to cover people's cell phone service in terms of their availability or access to information and fast speeds on the cell phone. And everything seems to be going towards the handheld mobile device these days. I know a lot of people who don't have computers anymore. They just use their iPhone or Android or whatever. I just wanted to let people know that the U.S. the Washington State delegation is very supportive of net neutrality, and there may be some future public forums and events happening in this state to try to educate not just the folks in this state, but folks across the country. And then the corollary there is that if Chairman Wheeler and the commission is successful in protecting net neutrality, and they are facing some opposition from Republican members of Congress who are trying to derail the process, but if they are able to push that through and get this reclassification, we are expecting major lawsuits by telecommunication companies. So it'll probably be a long, drawn-out battle. So there will be briefs that will need to be filed with the courts. This will be in the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. So there will be the need for amicus briefs and other information to provide for that case. And I'm trying to think, there was one more thing I was going to mention about that. Just keep your eye on that story, because it's not going to go away right away. It's an ongoing situation. And also, just to by the way, I did learn that the official policy, according to some employees of these corporations, the official policy of Microsoft and Google is to support net neutrality. I think Comcast is one of, and other providers may be opposing it. Also, just one quick thing before I finish my report here is, and this goes back to Michael Buell's report, Radio Shack has filed for bankruptcy. So keep your eye on that story too. So the availability of cheap electronic devices and all of the things that we used to go to Radio Shack for may be in jeopardy depending on what happens with that bankruptcy case. What I didn't mention about Seattle is that there is no rent control in the city. So the fact that it's got the fastest increase in rents in the country at the moment, and is the fastest building city, shows you what we're up against. There is a $15 an hour minimum wage that has been instituted in Seattle because the voters did approve that. It has gone into effect, although for small businesses there is a 2 to 3 year phase in. But the problem there is that the minimum wage has gone up to $15 an hour, but a lot of real estate property owners are just jacking up their rents. So this is just an editorial opinion, but it looks like it's a wash in terms of the cost of living in Seattle, because the fact that people are making more money on their jobs has not kept up with the rise in the price of products on the shelf and the raise in rents. And the problem there with the rent control issue is that this is a statewide prohibition, basically, on rent control in Washington State. So the city itself cannot do anything about it. It has to come from the state legislature. So I will definitely keep people up to date on that process as it goes forward, because there is a big call out for that. And our city council member, Shama Sawant, has been definitely pushing that idea as her next campaign, which is rent control in Seattle. Because it is pretty outrageous. There's just a huge displacement of the population going on here right now. And then also people should know that Comcast, which actually is CenturyLink in Seattle, has a monopoly. They have a contract with the city which does not allow other providers for cable television in this city. So that's one of the issues that people have had a problem with that company for a long time, is that they make deals with cities to basically monopolize the market within that community. And as I said, they are one of the folks that may be filing lawsuits if broadband internet service is reclassified under Title II of the Communications Act. So thank you, Check.
Okay, and Marie, we had somebody else with a report. I'm sorry. Oh, it was Dee. Dee Shanger has a report for us from Occupy Toronto. I was handling the live stream in cooperation, I didn't stress it enough, with Global Revolution.
I wanted to talk about what Mark was saying about net neutrality and the FCC decision that's coming down the pipe for, I hate the term, the way they use it, net neutrality, because it's the opposite of net neutrality. I wanted to put that in perspective, where far too often people mix up the words web or World Wide Web and the internet. They're two separate things, right? The web is one set service of the internet. Cellular communication is another service of the internet. Email is another service. FTP file transfer is another service of the internet. Now, the internet, yes, has been around since the 60s. The World Wide Web only since 89. And for the first time, Mark, I heard you say that, okay, even though this is not net neutrality, which is the opposite, it's pure censorship of the web and throttling big time. It's all this FCC ruling that's coming down the pipe for net neutrality, just to help out all the telecommunications giants and not us, that they're omitting the cellular communication part of the internet signal, which I find that weird. Maybe you could talk a little bit further about that, because that FCC ruling, which started last May 15th, and this is from a president, Obama, who used social media to get in back in 2008, and it just sickens me. And part of that will be throttling, meaning your internet signal will be back to dial-up modes. Censorship and denial of service for certain websites, et cetera, is all part of that. And if you could pay through the roof, if you're say YouTube or Google or a large corporation, and for your website, if you could pay a fortune to keep your speeds as is, then that's fine. But if you're a little guy and you can't pay, well, remember back in the days where it takes 2 to 3 minutes to load up a simple text and photo-based web page. Well, that's what's going to happen. Now, that said as well, under the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and all the Atlantic version of that, and all these World Free Trade, heavy censorship of the web is so much part of these packages, these so-called free trade deals, and I'll leave it at that. So, Mark, maybe a little bit more why they're omitting the cellular communication part. Over.
Yeah, Mark, do you have any follow-up on that?
I can only say that in terms of the cellular system, that it is one of the problems that Senator Cantwell has been talking about. So she would agree with Dee on the fact that it really doesn't, since it doesn't cover the cellular communication system, that yes, it will not protect people who use their cell phones to access the web. And she considers that to be a big problem. Other than that, I really don't know what more to say, except that part of my presentation at the senator's office was about specifically I was speaking about its effect upon the independent media. And yes, it will definitely affect folks in my field when it comes to using cellular devices, mobile devices, to access the web. So that is correct. Check. Hey, this is Mark, and I forgot to mention, too, that the cover of the Seattle Weekly and the Stranger magazine in Seattle are both highlighting the huge, incredible boondoggle that the Big Dig, Seattle's version of Boston's Big Dig, has become. We call it Big Bertha, and people don't realize that actually it's called Big Bertha because it's named after a woman who was a community leader back in the early part of the 20th century, who sort of for like one day took over the city as deputy mayor and fired a bunch of people and tried to stop all the corruption. And then, unfortunately, the mayor hightailed it back to Seattle when he heard what she was doing to stop her. But the Big Dig project here is very similar to what happened in Boston. It's a public works project that has spent billions of dollars, and it's the biggest boring machine in the entire world here. But it broke down because it hit some pipes or something, and so it's been a huge boondoggle that lots and lots and lots of money has been spent on, and of course it's not completed, and who knows when it will ever be completed or if it will ever be completed. But what the magazines are pointing out is that there were other options. The Governor Christine Gregoire sort of was in a personal political battle with Mayor Greg Nichols over whether to do a dig or just do a surface street to replace the Alaska Way Viaduct, which is structurally unsound. So if you go down to Seattle's waterfront, there's a big overpass that goes all the way across downtown. It's structurally unsound and needs to be replaced immediately. But instead of just tearing it down and building another one or putting a street highway along the waterfront, Mayor Nichols and his folks decided that they wanted to do this big tunnel so that the waterfront wouldn't be obstructed by traffic, which seems like a great idea, but now we see what happens with a lot of public works projects where millions and millions of dollars go to consultants, billions of dollars go to corporations like Bechtel and others to build these public works projects. So we had something called the Washington Public Power Supply Project here in Washington State a couple decades ago under Governor Dixie Lee Ray, actually more than a couple decades ago now. So there are two huge cooling towers that were built in Satsup, Washington by contractors, nuclear energy contractors. However, the project went so far over budget that it was never completed. So there are two huge cooling towers sitting out in the middle of this little town and no plant. And the point I'm trying to make is that once the taxpayers approve the money to go to these projects, or the government officials approve the contracts, the contractors get paid no matter what, whether the project is completed or not, unfortunately. And sometimes there are no bid contracts and other questionable policies involved with that. But to me, it's just another example, and I predicted long before it began that this is what was going to happen, that it was going to cost lots and lots and lots of money, and who knows if it'll ever actually be completed. But obviously, it's another form of corporate socialism because the corporations involved in these public projects are making lots and lots of money, whether or not the public is actually served in the end. And going over budget on a public works project is just par for the course. It's like expected. And I think that's interesting because in private enterprise, that's usually not tolerated and people get fired over things like that. But when it's a public works project, spend as much as you like.
Thank you, Mark. Taylor-Canfield from Seattle, Washington. This has been a special Democracy Week edition of Democracycast, our podcast about democracy, human rights, press freedom, sustainable public policy, environmental issues, open government, and other issues important for democracy in the 21st century. This is Dean Edwards. I'm coordinating editor for the International Collaborative Media Alliance and Democracy Watch News. For information about Democracy Watch News, see our Oximity.com homepage, check in Facebook.com, or for our news feed, which are available at the other two sites also, check where it originates at in twitter.com/DWatchNews. So at DWatch News is where we cover over 190 nations and territories every month. We augment and digest the news and occasionally produce original content. With that, I invite you to go to iTunes or your favorite podcast service provider, where our lipsyn.com service streams our podcast for your easy access. And you can subscribe to Democracycast there. You can listen to it there. And hopefully, if you like our show, you can give us, as my friends over at Greenpeace, their excellent podcast, say, you can give us some love and give a review. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you next week on one of our regular Democracy Movement's weekly international press briefings via live stream. And we announce that, of course, in Democracy Watch News on Twitter. This is Dean Edwards from Salem, Oregon. Bye until next week.